Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Was Jesus in reality a liberal rabbi? And I mean that by means of the modern category of liberal, or a forerunner of Christian liberalism? Is the Christ of faith and therefore the whole faith of the church just one big mistake? Benedict XVI explored those critical questions in his book Jesus of Nazareth, and we look at the answers with my friend Carl Olson, editor-in-chief of Catholic World Report and Ignatius Insight. Carl, great to speak with you again. How are you?
Good, Marcus. Good to be with you. Thank you.
It's always a joy to reconnect with you, and I want to start by saying very creative take and very timely one at that. So I remember reading Jesus of Nazareth and coming across those categories going, gosh, he makes sense. So let's start there. What was Jesus really trying to do?
Well, one of the chapters in Pope Benedict XVI's first book on Jesus of Nazareth is focuses on the Sermon on the Mount, and I think it's a very profound book overall. But what he really shows in depth is how Jesus is the new Moses, and more than just the new Moses who goes up on the Mount to deliver a new law or Torah. Jesus himself, Benedict writes, is the Torah personified. He's the fulfillment of the law. And so he becomes the law that we follow, that we have union with. And he draws a number of other parallels there, too. And I think one thing also that he brings out that I've long been fascinated by because of my interest in the covenant, just like yourself, is how, in Matthew's the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes are really the blessings of the new covenant. And then later in Matthew's gospel, towards the end, he gives the curses, the great woes. Woe are you, and he really lashes out at the scribes and Pharisees and so forth. And so Matthew is this deeply Jewish gospel that shows how Christ is the new Moses who perfectly brings to fruition everything that the law pointed towards, not as a way of saying the law is no good, but saying that now the law has been perfectly fulfilled, and we then can live in union with the perfect law, who is Jesus himself.
That concept that you bring up, this notion of a perfect law, to return to the way Ratzinger thought about law and the way Christ institutes law, means that we really are free people, but freedom doesn't mean wanton hedonism. So maybe even help us expand that by establishing what that freedom ought to look like and what was Jesus doing in terms of helping us understand our freedom.
Well, both Benedict and John Paul II, in their own ways, but very much in simpatico and how they did it, wrote and talked a lot about the nature of authentic freedom. And of course, first of all, that freedom is not the freedom to do whatever we like, to follow our passions, desires, fulfill ourselves, actualize ourselves, which of course is really what's the rage and has been the rage in the secular world for a long time, for decades, if not centuries now. Freedom is the ability to choose what is good, right, holy, and to then live in union with it, and not just live in union with it, but to be filled, as Christians, to be filled with the divine life of God himself, to accept the Trinitarian gift, and then be able to cooperate with the graces that God gives us. And that's true freedom, then, to cooperate and live as sons and daughters of God. So that authentic freedom is always aimed towards, it has an eschatological aim. It's ended towards the ultimate end, which is God himself, both here in this world, which of course is passing, but then ultimately in the world to come. And so this nature of freedom is, as you know, it's so badly misunderstood. I mean, people, unfortunately, we as Catholics oftentimes don't do a good job of explaining it. We talk about Christianity in terms of just being kind of a moral code. And of course, Christianity has a moral code, but ultimately that moral code is to be in sacrificial union with Christ, so then we can give ourselves sacrificially to others in our marriages, to our children, or if we're single, or a ordained priest or religious or whatever it is, we can then give ourselves to God and to others, perfectly, freely, lovingly. So, love, of course, can never be authentically love if it's not freely chosen. And I think that's such a key thing, especially when you're talking to skeptics. Like, why would God let there be sin? Why would God let there be evil, really is how they put it. Some of them don't believe in sin, but they believe in evil. And ironically, how can God, a loving God, allow evil? Well, it's a great mystery indeed, but part of the answer is that if God forced us to love him, it wouldn't be love. We all innately know that true love has to be freely chosen as an act of the will, not emotionally, which is a superficial view of love, but willfully chosen to the point of, dying to oneself, or dying, the martyrs, of course, are the ultimate, examples of this reality. So that's the nature of true freedom that Benedict and John Paul II especially have emphasized in their pontificates.
As you shared all of this, this really is the expansive and most beautiful view of human free will and therefore true freedom that you already alluded to this. This stands in direct contradiction to how the modern man wants to liberate themselves of all categories and to be free for free's sake. The problem, Carl, as you and I have talked about, is we sometimes even have Catholics, well-meaning, who think in those categories because this is the cultural water we swim in.
Yeah, and it's natural in a world that is filled with so much obvious, sin and evil. And if we're honest, when we look at our own lives, we see the sin and the deep problems in ourselves. Mm-hmm. It's easy to kind of build up a what I would call kind of a moralistic structure where, this is good, this is bad. There's nothing wrong, of course, with identifying what is good and what is bad. We must do that. But the question then is, for what end, and what animates that? What is the engine, of that? And the answer should be, of course, the divine life of God, that we were created out of love, and we're called to return fully and completely and eternally to that love. Christ on the cross gives us the most radical example of that self-gift, of that sacrificial love. And I think this is why I when I talk to non-Christians, depending on the conversation, I try to really bring them back, of course, always to the person of Jesus Christ and to the cross, because the cross continues to be a scandal. And that's not a bad thing, because the scandal forces us, the scandal being that it divides. It's the thing that really makes us decide which way we're going to go. Are we going to gaze upon the cross, or are we going to turn away from it? And I think that's really where the rubber meets the road so often. And when we just started talking about this is bad, this is good, this is bad, this is good, too often it just becomes a debate without really any kind of end, because the capital E end is not what is ultimately being discussed. That is God himself.
And that's why, going back to your brilliant reflection in Catholic World Report, one thing becomes very clear. Christ doesn't say, I'm trying to do away with any category of law. I've not come to abolish any of the laws, but to fulfill it. Give us a context of what Christ is trying to do here.
Well, it's a huge point, and it's one that really bothered me when I was a fundamentalist Protestant and then went to Evangelical Bible College, because I'd heard a lot of different things about the law. But one of the general things was that the law was bad. Jesus' teachings were good. Now, of course, I believe that Jesus' teachings were good, but there's so many things about why would God give the law? Why would there be such a huge... the entire Old Testament, whether it's historical books, the prophets, whatever it is, the Pentateuch, it's all bound up in the reality of the law and the covenant that it comes out of. There's a goal there, of course, and those are found in the Ten Commandments, to love God, worship God, etc. Well, those are the same things that we're called to now. But because of Christ, we're called to do them in a way that's radically, it's not that it's completely now different, it's that it's been fulfilled in a way that we can't even imagine. The incarnation was, the ultimate game changer. And of course, the incarnation is part and parcel of that scandal that I already mentioned. This is, of course, why Paul talks about, this is foolishness to the Greeks, et cetera, because it's too much. They don't want to handle. They don't want to believe in this reality. So Christ does not do away with the law. He fulfills it perfectly, so that we can live then in complete union with Him, who is the law.
I'm talking with my friend Carl Olson, editor-in-chief of the Catholic World Report and Ignatius Insight, and we're talking about Jesus was not just a liberal rabbi or a forerunner of Christian liberalism. He presented us the true framework of human law. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, talking with my friend Carl Olson, editor-in-chief of the Catholic World Report and Ignatius Insight. We're talking about Carl's recent piece in Catholic World Report on Jesus, liberal rabbi or incarnate Messiah. Carl, to get to one of the cores of your piece in Catholic World Report, it's easy for modern man to just reduce Jesus to nothing more than a social activist type rabbi. But your piece, and frankly the Christian Revelation, makes it very clear he was trying to achieve infinitely more than that.
Yeah, I think we're all familiar with variations on the belief that Jesus is a social justice warrior, or a great teacher, or a guru, or whatever. The biggest problem, and I point this out several times in my book on the resurrection, is that Jesus never presents himself that way, right? Jesus radically presents himself as something other than that. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's many places you could look to. And then, of course, he does things that just a social justice warrior or a guru don't do. I mean, he heals people. He casts out demons. He clearly believes that there is a demonic power, the devil. Here we are around Lent. He has the great, the temptations in the desert where he does verbal spiritual battle with the devil. These are the kind of things that people like to kind of go away. And so a lot of that flows out of the Enlightenment era, and especially out of liberal German Protestantism, where you had a number of different scholars. Many of them were scholars, or even popularizers who wrote histories of Jesus, where Jesus becomes, of course, just a great teacher, or a leader, or a political zealot, or whatever, to the degree that they end up just. The Jesus they present looks a lot like them. I mean, that's the funny thing that, like Albert Schweitzer noted in his book on the historical Jesus, all these authors essentially created a Jesus that looked like them. Well, Jesus, as the incarnate Word, the Son of God, who is fully man and fully divine, is something radically other than that. Like just yesterday, we were starting a Bible study in our parish, going through Ephesians, and you read, like, say, the first chapter of Ephesians or the first chapter of Colossians, and the vision there that's given of Christ, the perspective of Paul is amazing. Through Christ, everything was created. All things exist and are upheld because of Him, the Word. So when we think about, like, the Torah, we're talking about the Torah, the word Torah literally means, like, instruction or teaching. It's a form of words. Well, Jesus is the Word. That's why, of course, in John's Gospel, the prologue emphasizes this fact so much that the second person of the Trinity, the Word, becomes flesh. And so this is how then he, of course, can be the new law, because he himself actually gave the law as one of the three persons of the Trinity, right? So we start to think about these terms. It's a very different perspective than the one that we see kind of popularized out in kind of the secular or new agey realm that's popular among many folks.
As you're sharing all this, I can't help but think about C.S. Lewis and Mere Christianity, and Chesterton and Orthodoxy appeals to this argument. And you and I have spoken about this before, that maybe the reason modern man wants to reduce Jesus to a moral teacher is because then we can negate his very real demand of complete allegiance and discipleship.
Yeah, exactly. Once we think we can understand him, then we have him contained. That's the way I put it. Then we have him, then we've got him in a bottle. We figured him out. We can put him on the shelf. It's safe. Well, Jesus is not safe because Jesus makes demands of us that are radical. Every single one of us, even those of us who live just kind of ordinary lives, whether it's in our marriage or relationship with friends, family, children, whatever, he makes radical demands of us that require complete self-gift. And that's not the way of the world. The way of the world is to accumulate stuff for me, for my pleasure, for my desires. It's all about me. And Christ says, hey, look, as Philippians, right, Paul writes in Philippians, he was God, but he did not hold on to that. There's the great mystery of his self-emptying, his kenosis, and that is it's a radical challenge. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I myself actually have done well every day at responding to that, because it is so difficult. But that's the very thing. We can't we can't contain that. We can't grasp that fully. We have to trust. We have to allow ourselves to be motivated by something that is beyond our understanding. And I think that's really, to me, one of the great, wonderful things about the Christian faith, of being a Catholic, is that it's not safe. You know, it's not pablum. It's not bourgeois.
And it's not safe. It's not bourgeois. And at the same time, it's tremendously demanding. And there's actually something very enticing about the sheer magnitude of the challenge that Christ presents to us.
Yeah, it is. And I think this is why Christ, of course, gives thus the church. I mean, the church is our mother, the sacraments. We would not be able to, of course, even think about trying to live the life that he demands without supernatural grace. It's impossible. We know that. All the good works that we can achieve only are possible because of God's grace. And yet at the same time, we actually are free to choose those and to make those choices. We see this in the lives of the saints, the lives of the martyrs. That to me is a great comfort in becoming Catholic and leaving behind certain aspects of evangelical Protestantism, like where we didn't really talk about the saints. There wasn't this communion of saints. I mean, we might talk about it in the abstract. As a Catholic, it's so very real. It's there, and in a way that's so palpable, and that gives us great hope and assurance that we too can live that life of sainthood, of holiness. And again, I think it's exciting. I think too many people think that Christianity is boring. You know, you mentioned Chesterton. His chapter, I think it's chapter 6 on the paradoxes of orthodoxy, is so brilliant because he presents it as this wild and almost insane adventure, yet that is completely reasonable and rational because it's oriented towards the Logos, the Word, Jesus Christ himself.
Christianity, quoting Orthodox again, Christianity has not been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult and not tried.
Yes, exactly. Amy Chesterton captures that so well. And so, in this column we're talking about, I really want to push back on this idea that Jesus is kind of safe. That we can kind of get Jesus. We can kind of understand him. The thing is, when it comes to the great mysteries of the faith, the Trinity, the Incarnation, the sacraments, we can always learn more about them. Always. We should be always learning more, not just intellectually, but obviously in every way possible, spiritually, otherwise. But we can never, ever exhaust them. We can never come close to exhausting them. And that, I think, is a beautiful thing because it shows us who we are in relationship to God. It puts us in our proper place, which is not a way of being judged. It's a way of being truly loved. And I think that's what the world desires in all of its wayward and warped ways of trying to appropriate stuff. It's trying to find that, but it can't without Christ.
You also tackle that modern Protestant notion that, the law is done away with, and so we don't need it anymore, which is a very reductionistic view of the gospel.
Yeah, and I was raised with some of that as a fundamentalist. My parents to this day are wonderful people, godly people, but they've really embraced a view in which they say, hey, we don't need the Old Testament. My dad has told me this. I don't need the Old Testament. I don't even need he's told me, I don't need the Sermon on the Mount. I just need the writings of Paul. And my remark to him once was, so you're telling me that God became man and dwelt among us, the person of Jesus Christ, and he gives us, like, say, the Sermon on the Mount, which we're talking about a bit here. And we say, well, no, I'm just going to go with Paul. Paul himself would be shocked and horrified by that, right? Because everything that Paul did and wrote was essentially a commentary, a witness to what Christ himself said and did. Mm-hmm. And the Old Testament itself all points to and is fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. So the great thing about being a Catholic is that it's everything. It's both and. It's not this reductionist, like you say, this reductionist thing.
Carl, as you know, true honor, tremendous joy. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thanks, Marcus. Always fun.
My guest has been Carl Olson. He is editor-in-chief of the Catholic World Report and Ignatius Insight. And we've been talking about his recent piece in Catholic World Report, that Jesus was more than a liberal rabbi. Do read the piece and let's meditate on it in terms of our moral life. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.